Do you like killing your characters?
No, I don't.
Then
But
why do you do it so much, George?
I do think it needs to be done.
Big fan of death up there, okay.
Valor Morgulis, all men must die. I think it's part of life, and art needs to reflect life. Particularly if you're writing a fantasy novel, an epic fantasy novel. Certainly since the days of Tolkien, so many fantasy novels have been about war. I mean, there's a war at the center of Lord of the Rings. The Sauron and his great armies of orcs and Southlings and Easterlings and other lings are all moving out, and the free men of the West are fighting against them. And of course, in my books, there's a considerably more complicated war going on. But you look at all of the other writers who've been in between, and there's wars and wars and wars. Now, I'm not saying you have to write about war. There are many other interesting things to write about, and I've written about some of them. I don't have a war in all my books, but if I'm going to write about war, if any writer is going to write about war, then I want him to treat war honestly. And one thing I know about war from people who served in Vietnam and served in other wars is, it does bring out the beast in men, and anybody can die. It doesn't matter if you're the hero. I think everybody who died in any war thought they were the hero right till the moment that the bullet blew off the top of their skull. So it irritates me when I'm watching a movie or reading a book, and the hero is going through incredible dangers, him and his 6 buddies, and none of them die. Maybe one of them gets wounded at some point, but they all survive pretty much untouched at the end. I mean, and Tolkien, which I read when I was young and at a pretty formative age, I think. That book had an immense influence on me. And it does have some powerful deaths in it. The death of Boromir still resonates with me. That was a powerful moment. The death of Gandalf in the Mines of Moria, when the Balrog drags him down to the thing, and he says, "Fly, you fools!" and that's enormously powerful because especially at that point in the book, because Gandalf is the father figure. Gandalf is the guy who has the answers. Gandalf is the one who knows what they should do and how they should do it. And suddenly he's gone, and now the hobbits are on their own with Strider and Boromir and people they don't necessarily trust because their relationships are still fairly new at that point, and they're facing untold dangers, and they don't have Gandalf to warn them of exactly what's around the next turn in the bend. That's a hugely powerful moment, which I actually, if it had been me, Gandalf would have stayed dead. I think bringing him back is surprising, but in some ways it undercut the power of that moment. And by setting up those moments, Tolkien also set me up for the moment where it seemed like Frodo had died. When I'm reading the end of the Two Towers and Shelob stabs him and he seems to be dead, and Sam takes the ring, and then the book is over, and you have to wait for the next book. I really thought Frodo was dead. I thought Tolkien had earned his stripes with me. He had killed Boromir. He had killed Fred, and now he killed Frodo. My God, I really don't know what's going to happen in this book. Anyone can die. And it became so much more exciting at that point because anyone could die. The peril was real. And that's the feeling I want my readers to have, that if you're going to enter...
Fear is the feeling you want your readers to have. Yeah.
Yes, actually, in a word, if you're going to write about fearful situations, I want you to have fear, and the right kind of fear. I mean, we go on roller coaster rides, and we're scared, right? At roller coaster rides, are scary, supposedly, but we're not really scared. We know that we're going to get off the roller coaster after 3 minutes, and however high we go, and then we plunge down, and there's a certain thrill and I guess an adrenaline rush or something like that. So we like to be scared in certain senses, but that's one kind of fear. But there's another kind of fear that you feel when, like, you're all alone and you're walking in a bad neighborhood, and suddenly you hear footsteps behind you, and you turn and you see some people coming, and you don't know who the hell they are, and that's a moment. Or a moment that a soldier or a policeman or anyone fears when they're in a situation where their life is on the line. I mean, that's a much more visceral kind of fear, and that's the kind of fear I want the reader to feel. I mean, I think writing is about strong emotions. I want you to be afraid when I'm putting the characters in a scary situation. When a character dies, I want you to grieve for that character as you would for a friend or a loved one or a parent, and this entire, vicarious experience, which is my goal as a writer. I want you, if I'm going to describe a feast, I don't want to just say yes, and then they ate a feast.
It was delicious.
I wanted you to smell the food and taste the food, whether it's delicious food or bad food or whatever. Smell the particular things. If it's a joust, I want you to have the excitement of getting caught up in who's going to win the joust. If it's a sex scene, I want you to get hot and bothered. Or I want you not just to read my work, but to live my work. I know they're giving away this book bags here that some of the, I guess it went with the VIP tickets, that says a quote I said a couple years ago about a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one. But I've always felt that. I think reading is about vicarious experience. I look back on Tolkien, which I read, like I said, when I was 12 and 13, and I remember things that happened in the book, from half a century later, as if I lived them. I don't remember the actual things that I lived at that time. I have forgotten who sat behind me in geography class and, what I was doing that June, of my 13th year and all that. So much of this memory is gone, but the memory of these great books that I read at that time, not just Tolkien, but H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, Robert A. Heinlein, some of the books I was reading for school and all that, the classics of literature, Dickens and so forth, Shakespeare, those are very much part of me. And I think they're part of us all of us readers. We absorb this stuff, and it shapes us as much as the real events of our real lives. So in that sense, it is real. So I've long been an opponent of fan fiction. Mm-hmm. And let me define fan fiction very precisely here, because sometimes I get criticized by people saying, you wrote fan fiction when you were young and now you criticize it, how dare you? I wrote what we called fan fiction in the 60s in comic fandom, but that was simply fiction written by fans, right, and published without any money. And I certainly did a lot of that, but I never borrowed anybody else's character or world. I was a comic fan. I didn't write about Spider-Man or Superman or Batman. I created my own heroes, and wrote about them, the White Raider and Manta Ray and Garazan the Mechanical Warrior and all that stuff I was writing when I was 14 and 15. But they were my own characters and my own stories. What fan fiction has come to mean is writing Star Wars stories or writing Star Trek stories or writing, slash fiction, which is, taking characters and putting them together in unlikely sexual situations. And, I don't, what I don't know doesn't hurt me, so if people want to do that, fine, but don't send it to me and expect me to prove it or something. Now, fan art, that's fine, that's a whole nother thing. Fan art is great, and people do send me links to that all the time. Some of this you just have to, what you want to do for your own amusement is great, but you can't start selling it on eBay or merchandising it, because then you'll get sued. If not by me, you'll get sued by one of my multiple makers of bobblehead dolls or figurines, because you'll be moving into one of the areas that they're paying me good money to be into.
Right.
So.
And Tom, did you have a quick follow-up to that about what it means for the publishing industry now that, again, texts circulate beyond the actual books that you're selling?
Well, I basically agree with George that his ideas are his ideas. Somebody, his characters are his characters. For us, it doesn't have much effect because none of it is very powerful. Some of it creates good publicity and some of it is annoying, but frankly, we don't pay a whole heck of a lot of attention to it.
Okay. So George, for you, I'm curious about what does that mean to you as an author, creating a fictional world where that world now exists in multiple forms?
Well, it's been an interesting experience to say the least. I mean, when most of my career writing books like The Armageddon Rag and Fever Dream and Dying in Light before that, or all of my short stories, there was no secondary rights, there was no subsidiary rights. Occasionally I would get a movie option, most of which just paid me some money and they held the rights for a year or two and then you'd never see a movie or something. I did occasionally get something filmed. My novella Night Flyers was made into a film at one point. I had a story called Remembering Melody that became an episode of The Hitchhiker. So occasionally something came through, but there were no other rights beside that. But then when Game of Thrones started becoming popular, Song of Ice and Fire, suddenly I started getting these offers that I had never had before from various people who wanted to do replica swords or miniature figurines or, various types of games, role-playing games, paper and pen role-playing games, and video games, and just a bewildering number of things. And I remember having through a period where I said, well, I don't know if I want to take any of these things. Some of them seem kind of tawdry. I'm a serious writer. Would F. Scott Fitzgerald have ever had bobblehead dolls? And then I thought about it a little. I said, from what I know of F. Scott Fitzgerald, he would have sold bobblehead dolls in a minute if they offered him any money for that. So he and Zelda could have continued to party. So I signed these various contracts, and I think there've been good and bad things about it. I didn't want to be just a guy who signs a contract, cashes the check. I wanted to make sure that if I was going to do these products, that they were good products, that they were true to the material. So initially, I wrote in a lot of approvals to all of these things, that they could do the game or they could do the whatever it is, but I would have to approve everything. And that sounds good in theory, but of course what it led to me spending a lot of time approving stuff, and not only approving, but giving notes on stuff. And I was probably a little obsessive about it at first, and it wound up taking a lot of my time. So I still don't want to let crappy products get out there, but I have pulled back a little on the approvals now that I know some of my licensees and who I can trust and who I can't trust. But the good part is that I discovered that there's an enormous synchronicity here, because my readership started to build from people coming in from other avenues saying, I'd never heard of your series, but I played the role-playing game, and I loved the role-playing game. I thought I'd better look up the books, or, I collected miniature figures and paint them, and I saw your figures that Dark Sword was doing, and then I decided I'd better look up the books. So I was getting new readers from all of these things. It did cause a bit of a bump, with the HBO deal, which came along a few years later, because, customarily when you sell the rights to a TV or film company, they get all the merchandising rights. So HBO was saying, well, here's the deal, and we get all the merchandising rights. I said, I can't give you all the merchandising rights. I've already sold it to these other people. And what do you mean? We always get all the merchandising rights. And, it wound up for a time that it was looked like the whole deal was going to fall apart because, you know, even if I wanted to give them the merchandising rights, I couldn't because I had pre-existing contracts. But thankfully, my lawyers and agents were finally able to iron that out. But it was a ludicrous
But what do you
ludicrous negotiation at a point where it's saying, yes, we'll give you keychains, but we keep bobblehead dolls. You're going through all of that with the agent.
and
Now
what
that HBO is going, of course, I still have the old contracts that are grandfathered in that are still direct to me, but everything that's not under contract went to HBO. So now there's just a flood of merchandising coming out because nobody knows how to merchandise like a television network or a film studio. So there are new products coming out all the time, including some I never would have thought, like our own beer. I mean, it's great. We have our own beer. It's terrific.